Auction House. Written by Hakuei's Cooking and read by Goombasa. Sea salt-free water pumped into the summit of Sacroblus Island. It washed over the mountains, flooded the ground of the library of Daguerro, and filled the stone interior with an aquatic scent and a soothing rhythm that lulled the engrossed readers. A tailed girl who looked like she was in her late teens was sitting in the reading area on the second floor. The tower of books that ranged from historical, sociological, and geographical concealed her profile as she pored over a chronicle of the last century. Let's see. I was born a year before Terra's destruction, 15 years after Zidane, and 23 years after Kuja, which makes our birth years according to the Gaian calendar 1799, 1783, and 1776, respectively. Her finger traced down the timeline. Kuja's birth coincides with the coronation of Princess Brane Tilexandros, who was 16 at that time. The same age as that summoner girl when she was named queen of her country. Zidane's was the year in which Cid Fabul IX started researching power sources to fly airships other than the mist. And as for me, nothing. Mikoto frowned, disappointed that, unlike her seniors, nothing major happened in the year she was born. Come to think of it, during her first month of age, Garland had mentioned that Kuja had opened the factory in Dali to create killing machines that will raise the death toll in Gaia. Around that time, Garland was aware that Kuja was nearing expiration, and with Zidane's whereabouts still unknown, he had gone and brought her to life. Mikoto had always suspected that the reason why Garland had specifically chosen a female as his angel of death that time around was because women possessed more loyalty and discipline than men, making them easier to keep in line, or so he had believed. The clicking of a cane, accompanied by slow, heavy footsteps, halted Mikoto's train of thought. She looked up to find standing across from her a familiar hooded elderly man, one wrinkled hand gripping his cane while the other clutched a book to his chest. "May I sit here?" "Go ahead," Mikoto shrugged. "This place belongs to everyone." The old man, Kukuro, released a hearty laugh at her matter-of-fact response. He heaved a long, tired sigh that reflected his age as he took the seat across from her. "That young man with you, I don't see him around." "He went treasure hunting," Mikoto informed. She glanced at the clock above the librarian manning the hammock area that pointed at 3 before adding, "He'll come to pick me up at any moment." Ever since she had dug Zidane up from the raging roots of Lifa, the older genome had made it his goal to collect enough gil to present as a dowry when asking for Garnet's hand in marriage. Every morning, Zidane and she would mount his sky chocobo. She would get off at Daguerro to read up on Gaia while he followed rumors, folk tales, and old treasure maps in search for gold, jewels, and artifacts that could sell for a pretty penny. Come to think of it, Bermesia was the nearest town to where he had headed this morning. She wondered if he had bumped into Freya when stopping there for lunch, and might be caught up chatting with her at this very moment. "You two are relatives?" Kukuro asked, referring to Zidane and she. Mikoto gave it some thought before answering with a yes. Well, it will sound awkward to a normal Gaian saying they only shared the same DNA. "Your big brother?" Mikoto nodded. As much as she hated Zidane's "listen to your big brother, Mikoto, and do this and that," she had to admit it was accurate that he was her older brother. They both shared the same DNA, and he was born before her. "I could tell from the way you addressed each other," Kukuro chuckled. Mikoto wondered whether Zidane looked like the nagging elder brother, or she like the disrespectful baby sister, through this old man's eyes every time they argued. Going by logic, since the old man seemed to go way back with Zidane, his opinion of him must be more positive. The rising of the hydraulic lift near the weapon shop was heard in the distance, followed by quick strides that prompted Mikoto to listen in closely and expectantly. Throughout her first year in Gaia, Mikoto had discovered that the sound of footsteps could differ from one person to another, and one could identify from its pitch and pattern to whom they belonged. As the new arrival walked into the reading area, a female red mage gasped. The sales clerk paused in the middle of an argument as to why the shimmering aisles had disappeared, and Engineer Zelbot, who was standing at the top of a ladder placed against a bookcase, dropped the mechanics books he was about to return to its shelf. Mikoto's eyes widened as she took in Zidane's disheveled state. His face was powdered with dirt, Cuts marred his arms, and his clothes were torn and bloody in places. Mikoto was confused. Zidane always equipped a protect ring, immunized himself against status changes, and always took his Sagittarius with him to petrify monsters he could not handle by himself with the Soul Blade skill. Did he run out of MP, or was he taken off guard by some monsters that had minimized him? Well, I got careless. Zidane answered the silent question in Mikoto's eyes as he rubbed the back of his head sheepishly, avoiding all the gazes that scrutinized his unkempt appearance. Mikoto fidgeted in her seat as she became self-conscious by all the eyes that locked on Zidane and her, who was just addressed by him. It was the dirt and the bloodstains that attracted all this attention. And with her eyes averted from the crowd, she silently stretched a hand, palm outward. I downed an elixir earlier, so there's no need to Zidane gurgled the word that ended the sentence, as what gushed out of Mikoto was water instead of curaga that washed off the dirt and diluted the bloodstains. The water was next followed by a wind spell that dried him off and caused his hair to point in all directions. Since Garland had feared for her life if Kuja got wind of her existence and purpose, the old man had enhanced her telekinetic abilities and imbued her with magic that could neutralize Kuja's. If she and Kuja were ever to face off, the battle would have turned into a one-sided puppet show, with his tail tied around his legs and his hands over his mouth like a monkey that could speak no evil. After filling a canteen with the waterfall water outside, Zidane rushed back into the library and toward Mikoto, who was sitting by the Leviathan relief. After being handed the water, Mikoto added ground coffee, and Zidane whistled admiringly as the aroma of coffee filled the air as she heated the canteen with her fire magic that glowed from her hands around it. What happened back there? Mikoto inquired as she produced from her travel bag 2 wooden mugs, a pouch of sugar cubes, and a bundle that radiated a sweet scent of something baked. Zidane had told her on their way to the library this morning that the latest treasure map he had gotten his hands on pointed to a cave in Popos Heights. According to what she had read on Popos Heights, there were a series of mountains towering over Gizmaluke Grotto, with forests swarming with poison-belching dragons and birds that could summon a wind that will cut you like razor. Found this. Mikoto became captivated by one of the cylindrical objects that Zidane had unveiled that she began expecting from all directions. It was padded with velvet, rimmed with gold, and adorned with different hues of diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires that shone lustrously in the sunlight. As far as she knew, these 4 gemstones were the most valuable in Gaia, and when handled by a summoner, Ruby and Sapphire could summon the Eidolons Carbuncle and Fenrir, respectively. Is this a telescope? Mikoto asked as she looked through the lens that only showed a mishmash of colors and lines. No, a kaleidoscope. Zidane moved in closer. Here, let me show you. Mikoto felt Zidane's hand guiding hers to the dial, and as she began rotating it clockwise, the Genome Girl's mouth parted in awe as the lines and colors linked to form beautiful geometrical patterns that kept changing in shapes and colors. For a girl who had come from a withered, lifeless world, the wonders of Gaia that brimmed with colors other than blue and bustled with creatures other than monsters and soulless genomes never ceased to amaze her. The box I found it in was guarded by a grand dragon, Zidane explained. When I was about to petrify it, I spotted its nest egg on the ledge above the treasure box. It occurred to me that I'm the one intruding on its home. So you switched your strategy to dodging its attacks while prying the box open, Mikoto drawled as she took her eye off the kaleidoscope that imprinted a circle around it. She understood it was in one's genes to show kindness to family members. It was natural to do so toward friends, and it was in good manners showing kindness to strangers. But what she could never fathom ever since she had met him was showing kindness to an enemy. It may not show them the error of their ways, they may not appreciate it, and they could perceive it as pity, which could end up driving them to harm you to avenge their wounded pride. In other words, it wasn't worth it. At least, with the money I'll get from this, I'm closer to her than ever. Mikoto watched as Zidane pressed the kaleidoscope to his heart as he thought of Garnet. Why are you going to do this? Mikoto had to ask. Garnet is a queen. It's not like she needs your money to afford a royal wedding. Besides, I read that according to Gaian customs, it's the bride who's obligated to pay a dowry to the groom, not the other way around. Well, I'm a nobody with no family name or a fortune to boast about, Zidane explained himself as he wrapped the kaleidoscope carefully and placed it inside his travel bag. So, covering the expenses of an extravagant wedding and presenting her with enough gold to live a life of luxury will put me on the same level as her. Besides, I don't want people talking behind my back that I only married her for her money. Mikoto thought it quite ironic. If they were on Terra, Zidane would have been a VIP, all the girls would have fawned all over him, and he would have been any parent's dream to marry their daughter off to. A crackling sound caught the genome's attention. When they looked behind them, they saw the forest oracle Kildea and flower maiden Shannon leaning over a metallic bucket that breathed out smoke and a nutty scent. "Oh, it's autumn already in this part of the world," Mikoto noted as she recognized the scent as that of chestnut. One of the things that fascinated her about Gaia was the 4 seasons and the weather. Food and customs associated with each. Autumn was the season of falling leaves, while as spring that the outer continent enjoyed right now was the season of blooming flowers. One morning last summer, Zidane had told her and the other genomes to pack lunch in a basket and headed to Gagalrich Shores, south of the Black Mage village. On the sunlit beach, they had changed into the swimsuits that Zidane had brought from Lindblom and were taught how to swim, fish, and how to build sandcastles. They had brought home lots of fish, some they had cooked for dinner, some they had salted and dried, and some they had kept frozen overnight with ice magic to sell to the dwarves in the next day. Zidane had promised them that once winter arrived in the Mist Continent, he will contact the other party members and plan a ski trip to Arab Mountains. Snow did not fall on the outer continent, so Mikoto was looking forward to Zidane's skiing and skating lessons, and to taste the snow cones that Kino would make. "Want some, Zidane?" Kildea, who had just walked up to them, offered a handkerchief laden with roasted chestnuts. "We just collected them from the forest downstream." "Thanks!" Zidane accepted, making a mental note to wash the handkerchief before returning it to her next time he saw her. "Enjoy your coffee." Mikoto watched the 2 Clayrons as they excused themselves. The Clayrons and the Burmesians in the library thought highly of her because she was related to Zidane. They were always the first to say hi whenever they ran into each other, and always offered their assistance whenever she looked unable to locate a book. She wondered if their high opinion on Zidane and her will change to abhorrence if they found out they were both related to the one who had orchestrated the destruction of their homeland. How would they react if they knew that she had thought the death of their people was necessary as she watched Odin's spear turn Clayra to dust? "Let's dig in!" Zidane rubbed his hands together excitedly and unwrapped the bundle that contained their snack to reveal slices of Southgate bundt cake. He exclaimed with his mouth full after taking a bite, "Man, Corny has outdone herself." It was Zidane's idea to name the nameless genomes after characters from I Want to Be Your Canary. Cornelia was the item shop assistant who duplicated every food that Zidane brought her whenever he visited. Marcus was the little boy who the Black Mages had dubbed Mr. 333 and Mr. 777. Schneider was the stable boy who had become inseparable from Bobby Corwin. And Leo and Leona were the assistants at the inn. As the months had gone by, ever since they had arrived to Gaia, the genomes had grown less needy of Mikoto's guidance. Each had developed personality traits that dictated their behavior and decisions and learned crafts to get by on their own. "Have you heard? Cornelia wants to move into Lindblom and find work as a cook," Mikoto informed after swallowing her first bite of the cake, noting to herself how Cornelia had improved in making them. "She wants to gain enough money and experience to open her own bakery." "Wow, that's pretty big," Zidane commented. "Wonder if Old Man Popo is looking for help." "Not only Cornelia." Mikoto took a sip of her coffee. "Marcus also wants to move into Lindblom to join Tantalus as an actor." "Whoa, have I become his role model?" Zidane chuckled as he flipped a chestnut and moved his head back so it would fall straight into his mouth. He thought it would be confusing and quite amusing to have 2 with the name Marcus around. "I, too, have been thinking about leaving the village," Mikoto finally declared, watching their blurry reflection on the rippling water as she placed her coffee on her lap. She was grateful for how the Black Mages had shared their home and food with them, even though they had nothing to give in return. However, the more she had seen of Gaia and its civilization that was centered in the Mist Continent, the more she longed to be a part of a big community surrounded by libraries, shops, harbors, and airships that brought in people from all over the world. Zidane, who had always thought of Mikoto as some sort of a leader figure to the genomes, was taken aback by her decision. And what do you plan to do? When I was created, Garland told me that in order to fund ways to raise the death toll in Gaia, we needed a lot of money and manpower, Mikoto explained. Terra, in the prosperous old days, had something called an auction house. I suppose you're familiar with how a place like that operates? Zidane nodded. After annihilating the summoner tribe, Kuja assumed the identity of a nobleman and opened an auction house in a city populated by Gaia's richest people to raise capita. And that's Treno, right? Zidane concluded. Come to think of it, Freya had mentioned on the Blue Narcissus while looking for the Desert Palace that during the card tournament she had discovered that Kuja had been the auction house proprietor, Lord King. Zidane had found it ironic that Kuja could be the very Lord King he had robbed some years ago. And speaking of which, he wondered how that guard he had framed was doing right now. I've been reading on how to claim my rights to that place now that Kuja is gone, Mikoto explained. Back on Terra, there was something that's called a DNA test. DNA is a substance in your body that contains hereditary information, and it has to match up to that of the one you want to prove your blood relation to in order to inherit them. However, on a less scientifically developed world like Gaia, the process is more complicated, especially if there isn't a written will that points to your existence in relation to the deceased. But Dagger already knows that Kuja is Lord King and that he and all the other genomes share the same blood, Zidane surmised. Yes, that's why I've been meaning to ask you to set up an audience with her. The coffee in Mikoto's mug sloshed from side to side. She is the queen. One word from her and the place will go to me, no questions asked. Let's go see her then. Zidane got up and dusted the back of his pants off. Now? Mikoto asked, bewildered. Yeah! Zidane slid on his travel bag. We'll make it by tea time if we fly northwest from here. The setting shifted to a balcony overlooking the lake and waterfall that poured into Guntius Basin in the Alexandria Kingdom. The mahogany table that the Genome siblings and the summoner were sitting around was dressed in embroidered silk and topped with silver teapots and cutlery and china cups and saucers. The three-tiered stands in the middle of the table were filled with scones, sandwiches, and intricately garnished cakes and surrounded with butter, honey, marmalade, and jams of all varieties. Tea time with the Queen was a feast in itself. I understand. Garnet, who was in a simple long-sleeved dress and wearing her hair in its trademark low ponytail, nodded. I'll send someone to take care of the paperwork first thing in the morning. In other words, the place is as good as yours. Zidane winked at his sister, giving her a triumphant thumbs up. Thanks. Mikoto blushed, her short strands swaying in the afternoon breeze as she took a bite of the scone she had smeared with jam and clotted cream. She had read in a book that scones were an Alexandrian specialty that was a cross between a bread and cake. She had been looking forward to trying them out along with every delicacy of every region in Gaia. Now that you've come all the way here, why don't you stay in for the night? Garnet, who had already told the servants to prepare the guest rooms for them, offered hopefully. Ruby's theater is performing I Want to Be Your Canary this evening. Let's go together. Mikoto's eyes lit up. She had heard from Zidane that the ex-Tantalus member, Ruby, was the best actress to ever play Princess Cornelia. Sorry, Dagger, but I'll pass. Zidane turned her down. You're the queen, and everyone knows we have the hots for each other. It won't do you any good if we spend the night under the same roof and someone started rumors about us. Mikoto understood that when a man and a woman shared a bed, and by some process unexplained in any book their sperm and egg united, a child will be conceived. It also seemed from some novels she had read that a child conceived out of wedlock was highly frowned upon, so any physical contact between an unmarried man and woman, or occasion in which they were found alone together, could bring suspicion over their chastity. Mikoto, on the other hand, will take you up on that offer. Mikoto was taken aback by his declaration, and she objected. But... She was not that close to Garnet. Just what could the two of them talk about and do together without Zidane as a mediator between them? Come on. Zidane leaned in closer to whisper into her ear. As future sisters-in-law, it will make me really happy if you two became friends. And with that, Zidane excused himself that he will go book a room in the inn, promising that he would be back to pick them up at dusk. The wind whistled through the trees and scattered autumn leaves on the lake's surface as Zidane's footsteps faded into the distance. Garnet smiled at Mikoto, who smiled back at her politely as she finished her tea. A few silent minutes passed between them, without Mikoto reaching for more food, which Garnet took as a sign that her guest was full. "Well, shall I show you to your room, Mikoto?" Garnet stood up and led her guest out of the waterfall drawing room. "Zidane told me that you like to go to Daguerreau." Garnet started the conversation as they walked together toward the guest's quarters. Her eyes lit up as she added, "He also told me you've been reading a lot of Lord Avon's works lately. In Gaia, people would assume that you've been living under a rock if you don't know who Lord Avon is." Mikoto actually spoke from experience. What had triggered her interest in Lord Avon was an exchange with a scholar in her first visit to Daguerreau that had left her utterly embarrassed. At that time, she was checking the atlas when the sales clerk and the red-haired young man were in the heat of their debate why Princess Cornelia had killed herself. The scholar sitting across from her sighed that they were at it again, and turned to her and asked her what she thought was the author's reasoning behind killing Cornelia off. Mikoto raised a brow at him. "Who's Cornelia?" And the scholar gaped at her. "You've never heard of Lord Avon's I Want to Be Your Canary?" Next, an embarrassed Mikoto returned the atlas to its respective shelf and pulled a copy of I Want to Be Your Canary instead. She had ended up taking the book home because she could not put it down. A few days later, she found herself traveling to Lindblom through Fossil Rue with Zidane and the other genomes to see the actual play. After making a few turns through hallways adorned with portraits of past royalties and paintings that captured landscapes of Alexandria, they stopped before a double door. When Garnet gripped the griffin head knob and parted the doors open, they were greeted by the scent of freshly cut roses and two maids that curtsied to them. "This will be your room, Mikoto," Garnet informed the younger girl that had become taken by the size and beauty of the room that would be all to herself tonight. She then excused herself to go and choose a wardrobe for her guest that had arrived with only the clothes on her back. "Zidane will pick us up at 6 o'clock. I'll leave you to rest until then." Once Mikoto was left alone, she went to explore the room around her. She started with the bookcase, which was next to a Victorian reading couch, with a side table topped with biscuits and a teapot kept warm with a wooden tea cozy. The bookcase was stacked with all of Lord Avon's plays, classic literature, guides on Alexandria, and other books that tapped all interests. The bed that she sat on to test its comfort was a four-poster with beautiful rose carvings on the headboard, and the adjoining marble bathroom had stained glass in the place of windows with a rose garden motif, like everything else in the castle. As she examined the aromatic oils and scented candles placed around the large tub, Mikoto contemplated what to do until evening. As tempted as she was to grab a book she had never read before and munch biscuits, it would be better to wash herself off of the sea salt smell that had clung to her on her way here and make herself presentable for the outing. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the stained glass to cast a warm, colorful glow on the steamy water that poured into the tub. Mikoto sprinkled the bath with jasmine and peppermint oils and agitated the water with her hands to disperse them. She lit a few candles, unclipped her hair, and released a relaxed moan as she soaked into the tub. The sky was a fiery orange when Mikoto exited the bathroom clad in a fluffy bathrobe and hair blow-dried with wind magic. When she was about to slip into her trademark Terran outfit, she heard a knock on the door. "We're the handmaidens assigned to your service, my lady," two females responded formally in unison. "We've come to get you ready for the outing with Her Majesty the Queen." When Mikoto let them in, the two maids that had greeted her in the room earlier walked in carrying a suitcase closet. After setting it vertically, they opened it to reveal 3 silk dresses hanging on the hanger. One a frilly pink, another a lacy blue, and the last one an embroidered yellow. Each dress came with a matching accessory, hair ornament, and a pair of shoes. "Which one would you like to be fitted into, my lady?" one maid asked her. Mikoto fingered the dresses and examined them in a trance-like state. While she was sightseeing in Lindblom, fancy dresses on display that contrasted with her plain Terran outfit had caught her attention. Zidane had given her some pocket money to buy whatever she liked, but being the practical realist she was, she had preferred spending it on owning her favorite books that she will read time and time again. Finally, liking the lace patterns and wanting to see herself in a different color, she pulled the blue dress. "Over here, my lady." The maid that held the undergarments for her guided her towards a partition in the corner of the room, which Mikoto understood was used to change clothes behind when other people were in the room. First, she was handed underpants and a chemise, which she figured by its sheer length should be worn over the underpants. "Let me help you with the corset, my lady." Since Mikoto's waist was fairly small, the maid had no problem fitting the corset to her body. The petticoat followed, then the hoop skirt, and finally the dress that brought out the color of her eyes. After having her hair brushed, adorned with a crystal comb, and the collar of her dress pinned with a cameo brooch, she slipped into a pair of boots and exited her room. As she approached the foyer, she saw a laughing Zidane clutching his stomach, that middle-aged knight with the rusty armor jumping up and down indignantly, Garnet with her hands on her hips scolding them both, and the female knight with the silver eye patch shaking her head at them. "Oh, it's you." Beatrix was the first spotter, ending the men's quarrel. "Long time no see," Mikoto smiled as she nodded. General Beatrix was tough as nails, but at the same time beautiful and ladylike. A part of Mikoto admired her and looked up to her. She then addressed her hostess. "Thank you for the dresses. They're gorgeous." "I didn't know what to get you other than pink, so I went for colors that matched your hair and your eyes." Garnet smiled at her welcomingly, glad that she liked what she had chosen for her. "Let's get going, my lovelies." Zidane offered his arms to the girls to hook theirs around them. "This is a bit embarrassing." Garnet blushed, hesitating, as she thought of all the staring she would get from the townsfolk for locking arms with her significant other. Mikoto, who grimaced at the thought of being guided around like a child, told him bluntly that, "I can walk by myself." It all caused the ex-ladies' man to hang his head in disappointment. "Zidane, you'd better take good care of the queen," Steiner told the younger man gruffly, still upset at his snide remark earlier, that he was wrapped around Beatrix's little finger. "Don't worry." The thief sprang to his full height, puffed up his chest, and pounded it reassuringly. He became uplifted by the thought that he will be Dagger's knight in shining armor tonight. The sky was half orange, half indigo when they walked out of the castle. Instead of taking into the air with Chocobo, who must have been munching on gishal greens in the stables, Zidane helped the ladies into a boat to cross the water that separated Alexandria Castle from the town. When they exited the castle's gates, the stands in the plaza were unmanned and emptied of products. When Mikoto looked through the windows they passed by, she saw girls her age helping their mothers in the kitchen, men seated in front of the fireplace smoking their pipes while children played with their cats or dogs. They finally took a right turn into an alley with a sign above stairs leading down to Ruby's theater. After handing Ashley their tickets, they were escorted to the frontmost table, and Mikoto looked around her appraisingly. Instead of rows of spectator seats, there were a few tables with chairs around them, like what you would find in a bar or a restaurant. Instead of crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, there were candles and lamps on the walls, and instead of being handed a program each, Ashley only offered them a smile and a bow. All in all, everything around her was in a much smaller scale compared to the grand theaters of Lindblom. "Well, what do you think?" Zidane, who had been observing her, asked. Whenever he took her to a new place, Mikoto's eyes would light with curiosity like a newborn child, and she would examine everything around her like a researcher dissecting a specimen. "It seems drama and stage aren't big in Alexandria like they are in Lindblom." Mikoto tried not to offend her hostess. "It could be different a few years from now," Garnet promised. "Ever since Ruby opened this theater, watching plays has become a local pastime. I heard a drama school will be open soon. I hope that one day Alexandria will have its own theater district, just like Lindblom." The place got louder around them as people poured in. Since it would be a Lord Avon play tonight, the place was more packed than usual. The audience fell silent as the band behind the stage started playing the prelude, and the curtains parted to open the play with the famous duel between Marcus and King Leo. "Thanks." Steiner smiled back as Beatrice offered a slice of the pumpkin pie she had baked during her respite this afternoon. "I'm not much of a cook," Beatrix confessed. She told him a little story as she poured them some tea. "I practiced swords all day, and Mother always complained I wouldn't make a good wife one day. She made me help around in the kitchen whenever she invited our neighbors for dinner. Their son had a lot of promise, and she hoped he'd take me off her hands one day. Mother is renowned for a pumpkin pie in the neighborhood, and I made one for old time's sake. Steiner looked out of the barracks window that gave a nice view of the twin moons in the sky, Gaia's blue moon and Terra's red moon. They reminded him of his young queen and the thief who had stolen her heart. You know, sometimes I wonder if I'm doing the right thing. He shared his dilemma with his fellow knight. I know this is what the queen wants, and I don't want to see her miserable ever again. But I can't help but think what the late king and queen will say about their daughter warming up to a peasant. Not to mention an alien who's related to the one who was behind Queen Brane's murder and the destruction of Alexandria and the other kingdoms. Steiner kept that last thought to himself. I'd rather take orders from a peasant who can hold his own in battle than someone who hides behind his family name. Beatrix referred to all the noblemen from Treno that her queen had turned down as she took a sip of her tea. It's not that I don't approve of him, Steiner clarified. Zidane is a good, honorable man who I trust with my back. It's just that I can't help but worry what people will think when they discover his background. Some people had their doubts when the queen ascended the throne, and I don't want anyone to doubt her judgment ever again. Everyone acknowledges Zidane as one of the heroes who saved the world, Beatrix reasoned. Plus, he is well acquainted with the ruling families of Lindblom and Bermesia. Bravery, wisdom, and honor is what you need to govern a country, not pedigree. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'm thinking too much, Steiner admitted as he watched the reflection on his tea that glittered with the light of the overhead chandelier. Sometimes I tend to forget what's important. And I'm here to remind you. Beatrix smiled as she extended her hand to place it over his, and Steiner smiled back as he squeezed it fondly. Gasps, sniffs, and sobs emanated from the audience as Cornelia flung herself between her father and Marcus's dagger that pierced through her heart. A tear trickled down Mikoto's cheek. No matter how many times she watched this scene or reread it in the book, it never failed to bring a tear to her eye. Back on Terra, all the reading materials she had access to were of academic nature, so all the concepts, themes, twists, and character archetypes in I Want to Be Your Canary were completely new to her. For a girl who had yet to fall in love, it totally puzzled her why someone would knowingly make the wrong decisions, willingly put themselves through hardships, and place a complete stranger over their family and friends to satisfy this thing called love. Mikoto thought that both Marcus and Cornelia were selfish fools for trying to work out a love that will result in inconveniencing their kingdom and themselves. But despite that, she had found herself wishing that they had somehow overcome everything and ended up together. After the narrator said his last line, the curtain lowered over the stage, and the place burst with applause and cheers as the cast assembled and bowed to the audience. Let's go say hi to Ruby and everyone. Zidane got up, with the girls following behind him, and led them through a door that opened to a corridor with the doors on either side. One door was marked props, another costumes, and 2 dressing rooms opposite each other, one for men and the other for women, which Zidane knocked on. The genome boy and the summoner heard a familiar voice that told them to come in, and when they entered, there was the blue-haired lady playing Cornelia, still in her costume and in the middle of removing her makeup. Zidane! And Dagger, too! How you doing? The shrill voice and thick accent reminiscent of the Kondipiti dwarves took Mikoto aback. She had heard that actors were talented people who could adapt to any personality no matter how much it differed from their own. But the difference between this loud woman and the proper soft-spoken Cornelia was mind-boggling. And who's that little lady with you? Ruby referred to Mikoto, whose fancy dress and accessories made Ruby mistake her for a noble. My sister that I told you about, Zidane introduced. Mikoto, right? Ruby, who had already heard about Terra, the genomes, and Mikoto's obsession with Lord Avon from Zidane, greeted her. How did you like the play? Though I always imagined Cornelia with blonde hair for some reason, your portrayal of her was vivid and spot on, Mikoto praised. Zidane wasn't exaggerating when he told me you're the best actress to ever play her. Glad I didn't disappoint you. Ruby laughed heartedly, already liking her. After escorting Mikoto and Garnet back to the castle, Zidane headed to the bar to have a drink with Ruby, Ashley, and Lowell, who had invited himself. At the dinner table in the castle, Mikoto unexpectedly found herself getting along with Garnet pretty fast. They both had reading as their favorite hobby and could not tire of discussing the slightest details of Lord Avon's plays. Also, unlike Zidane, who would not miss an opportunity to tease her and was difficult to approach on some matters due to their different genders, Mikoto found Garnet more comfortable to be around. What were your thoughts on Cornelia's romance with Marcus before you met Zidane? Mikoto was curious to ask as the servants removed the main course and served them peach pudding. At that time, you were a royalty who barely interacted with commoners, and everyone must have expected that you'll marry an important man one day. Back when I was a child who had yet to know the love between a man and a woman. Garnet put her dessert spoon down with a clunk, feeling a little embarrassed as she talked about her old naive and helpless self. As a daughter who was obedient to her parents, I was scared every time Cornelia opposed her father or snuck out to meet Marcus. As a princess who always thought about what was best for her people, it worried me that her turning down Prince Schneider will ruin the relations between the two kingdoms. However, Marcus was a good person who genuinely loved Cornelia. It saddened me that King Leo only saw him as a peasant who could not benefit him politically or financially. I thought it would be great if everyone would look past their social standing and embrace each other for who they are. You're an idealist. Mikoto chuckled as she gave her an assessment of what kind of ruler she was. With money and power comes a sense of superiority over those who have little or none of both. As much as I wanted for Cornelius and Marcus to overcome everything, the only happy end that will not drive me to suspend my disbelief is where they elope and start over in a faraway land. But that still wouldn't solve the problem at its roots, would it? Garnet reasoned. Lord Avon wanted to change the system by conveying through his plays the suffering of those who can't be together because society won't accept their differences. When everyone watches Cornelia and Marcus's death scene, their hearts are united. They feel sad and wish everything had been different for those two. It's at these times when people correlate what they have just seen to the world around them, and they're filled with the desire to change it for the better. Silence followed as Mikoto kept her cynicism to herself. No matter the time and place, there will be megalomaniacs like King Leo and tragic lovers like Marcus and Cornelia. But still, she respected Garnet's resolve to use her powers as a queen to change what was wrong with her society. After dinner, they moved the conversation to the living room, where Garnet and her parents used to spend time together. The topic of Marcus and Cornelia branched off to Zidane and Garnet's relationship, and Garnet blushed as she talked about her journey with Zidane, his attempts to hit on her that only ended with her making a fool of him, and how his kindness and courage had ended up winning her over. Around lunchtime in the next day, Mikoto was between heaven and earth, as she looked down from the red rose that was advancing towards Treno. The land below had shed its green and was clad in the golden robes of autumn, and the river that originated from Alexandria Plateau swirled around the forest and hills. There you are! Mikoto's hair tickled her mouth as she looked over her shoulders to see Zidane descending the stairs towards her. The yellow dress that she was wearing blended with her hair color and shone brilliantly in the sunshine. Where's Garnet? In her cabin looking over some documents. Zidane became haunted by memories as he looked at the section of the ship around him. This was the place from which they had helplessly watched Clara get destroyed, and he and Vivi were at a loss as how to console the devastated Freya. I hope I'm not imposing on her. Zidane smiled, delighted at how his sister had softened up towards Dagger. Nah, he reassured. She doesn't get to go out of town much, so she's thankful for this. I want to buy a present for her and you, as a thank you for all you've done for me. Mikoto blushed. I thought a good book that she's never read before will make the best gift, but all the books that I thought she might like were already available in the castle library. Maybe it would be best to go for jewelry after all. What will be the first thing you'll buy with your profits from the auction? Zidane looked sideways at her as he leaned against the railing, his ponytail waving in the wind like a banner. An airship, so I can go to Daguerreau and watch plays in Lindblom whenever I want. I'll hook you up with the guys that built the Prima Vista if you want, Zidane offered. You haven't yet told me what you want for a gift. Mikoto changed the subject, feeling the urge to be on equal footing with the one who had showered her with nothing but kindness ever since he had met her. I could use a new shirt. Zidane hopped onto the railing and balanced himself as he walked back and forth on it. You know, you have a right to the auction house as much as I do. Mikoto watched him, unfazed by the danger he could be in from this height. Coming from a noble family will be a plus to you when asking for the queen's hand in marriage. I'm Zidane Tribal, the adopted son of Baku of Tantalus. Zidane stood on his head. Always have been, always will be. They heard a door open in the distance, followed by Garnet exiting the dining room to look for her guests and inform them that lunch was ready. The Mughal Sereno guided her to where they were, and a terrified scream tore from her lips when she spotted Zidane, who almost fell overboard as he tried to balance himself with one hand on the railing. We've been expecting you, Lady Mikoto King. The auctioneer greeted Mikoto and her escorts with a row of bowing servants on each side of him once she and her company stepped inside. A deputy from Alexandria Castle informed us of the situation. We all welcome you as the new head of the family. Nice to meet you. Mikoto greeted back and surveyed her new home. She could not wait to see her room and the study and what view they had. Oh! The auctioneer noticed Zidane, who had become one of the auction's biggest patrons in the past few years. Hey! Zidane greeted with a wave of his hand. Shall I show you around, milady? Still wondering what was going on, the auctioneer began his tour of the place. There were flamboyant wall decorations and creepy statues here and there, but Zidane and Garnet noticed that unlike the desert palace, the king mansion adhered more to the Alexandrian architectural style and was cozier as a home. There were rooms where Kuja and Mikoto's tastes collided, and Mikoto made a mental note to redecorate them later. From what she had seen of the buildings in Limblum and Alexandria, Mikoto found herself in love with velvet furniture, colorful wallpapers, and paintings that depicted the night, the greenery, and everything that Terra was devoid of. After being shown the drawing room that overlooked the garden, the study that gave a nice view of the sea, and the hallway that connected the house to the auction, they reached a room with a pink 4 poster, by which they found Mikoto's suitcase closet. Forgive me for not preparing the master bedroom for your stay tonight, milady. The auctioneer bowed apologetically. The master's bedroom is still filled with the previous master's belongings, and I wanted to hear your opinion before moving them. The two genomes and the summoner shared a knowing look that the auctioneer did not miss, and Mikoto told him, Very well, show it to us now. Across the hall was the master bedroom that overlooked the card stadium and Queen Stella's mansion. Zidane, who had been with Kuja in his last moments, began exploring the room with a wistful look on his face, starting with the dressing table, where ornamental feathers and a brush strewn with Kuja's silver hair was still there. Garnet watched Zidane with mixed feelings from the doorway. She could never forgive Kuja for corrupting her mother and killing her once she had served her purpose, but she still could not bring herself to hate a man who had used his last ounce of strength to save Zidane and her friends. Pardon me for asking, but are you familiar with Lord Kuja? The auctioneer, who had become puzzled by the genome's behavior around the room, had the urge to ask. We're siblings. Mikoto, who was standing by the bookcase, faced him. She was holding a book of poems that had caught her interest. The older man was taken aback. He looked from the new lady of the house to Zidane and compared them both to his previous master from his memories, and the result was contradictory. However, for someone who had interacted with the haughty, greedy, and two-faced nobles of the city over the years, he did not detect a shred of lie in Mikoto's words. Oh, yes, of course. It only made sense that only his previous master's blood relatives would inherit the estate. It's been a couple of years since we've last heard from Lord Kuja. How is he doing? He's dead, Zidane informed him above a whisper, as he picked up a silver feather and traced its length. I see. The auctioneer lowered his head mournfully. During the last year he had seen his master, the latter had made it a habit to alternate his stay between Treno, Alexandria, and his palace in the northern continent, but he usually stopped by to give orders regarding the factory in Dali. As the months and years had gone by without hearing from his master, he began to develop a feeling that something like that might have happened to him. I'll take the other room, Mikoto declared after examining the room some more. It's about the same size, and I like the garden view better. Part of the decision also stemmed from the fact that this room, and Kuja's traces all over it, must be holding a sentimental value to Zidane. He might want to revisit it whenever he dropped by. Very well. The auctioneer bowed subserviently. Would you also honor us with your presence in tonight's auction, milady, or would you like to rest for the day? Mikoto immediately eyed Zidane and Garnet to see if they had the energy for that. When Garnet smiled at her supportively and Zidane gave her a thumbs up with a "You go, girl," she nodded excitedly. We'll be there. That evening, the party was seated at the balcony on the second floor of the auction, looking down at nobles who could not wait to flaunt their ability to spend money. The hall fell into silence once the auctioneer made his entrance. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we start, I would like to introduce the new proprietor and sister to the late Lord King, Lady Mikoto King. The hall echoed with voices that expressed surprise and curiosity as all heads moved in the direction that the auctioneer pointed at as he introduced her. After taking a look at the young heiress, everyone began thinking up ways to get close to her. Balding gentlemen who frequented the card stadium wondered if Mikoto was into Tetramaster. Ladies who scrutinized the way she dressed over their fans intended to be the first to invite her to tomorrow's afternoon tea at Café Carta. As for young bachelors who desired for nothing but to add the king's family fortune to their own, they began making plans for all the roses, chocolate, and love letters written by hired poets to woo her with. Looks like you have admirers who will be camping outside your house tonight, Zidane commented amusedly, as he looked at all the younger men who had yet to break their gazes from his sister. What's there to get excited about? Mikoto grimaced. It's obvious they're only interested in my money. You're no fun, Zidane laughed. Let us begin. The auctioneer's cough brought the room to silence. Today's items are the acclaimed Madane's ring, magician robe, fairy earrings, and jeweled kaleidoscope. First, the acclaimed Madane's ring, starting at 4,300 gil. As the crowd below placed their bids over the three first items, Zidane and Garnet reminisced about their visits to the auction during their previous adventure. Garnet sounded indignant as she reminded Zidane of his refrain to take her along to Bermesia, and how she had ended up getting pickpocketed and hit on by a dirty old man while looking for Supersoft to depetrify Blanc. And now for tonight's highlight, a jeweled kaleidoscope. The auctioneer spoke dramatically as he unveiled the item that Zidane had put up for bidding, and the nobles gasped as they took a closer look with their opera glasses. According to our appraiser, it dates back to a couple of centuries ago. The metallic parts are 24 carats gold, and the jewels are diamonds, emeralds, rubies, and sapphires. All are genuine and of the highest quality. We opened the bid with 100,000 gil. The bidding price went up to double, triple, and quadruple within seconds, as young men who wanted to impress Mikoto competed with one another. Zidane was quite pleased at the shouting match that went on downstairs. At this rate, he would be able to propose to Garnet in no time. I just heard 5,000 gil. The hall was quiet, the wealthier and less stingy contemplating whether the item was worth it. 500,000 gil. Any more? The one who had placed the last bid tried his best to mask his worry and regret. He was an upstart who could not afford that much, and it did not seem that the item will regain him half of what he was about to fork over in case he resold it. 1 million. Everyone directed their gaze towards Mikoto, their jaws dropping. The palm that she was raising and her companions who were looking at her with eyes wide with surprise indicated she was indeed the one who had just spoken. I just heard 1 million gil. The hall was silent. 1 million gil. Any more? No one dared to up that price. Sold for 1 million gil. The auctioneer closed the auction with a clap of his hands. I can't accept it, it's too much! Zidane sounded a little angry. His pride was hurt, feeling like a charity case, as he sensed that Mikoto had placed that ridiculous bid just to help him with the matter with Garnet. Like I told you, you have a right to this place as much as I do, so consider it your share of the inheritance. Mikoto shrugged. Besides, I've wanted that kaleidoscope ever since I saw it. I couldn't bring myself to ask you to give it to me. But, Zidane argued, you know our policy. No exchange, no return. Mikoto ended the discussion with the hand she raised dismissively. In the next day, after escorting Garnet back to Alexandria Castle, Zidane went back to Treno to get Mikoto's help in choosing an engagement ring. On their way back home from lunch, Mikoto discovered an antique shop, in which she found a diorama of the entire kingdom with Moogle, Chocobo, townspeople, and Knights of Pluto figurines. After consulting Zidane and some contemplation, she ended up buying it and shipping it to Garnet with a thank you letter for all she had done for her. On the night Zidane popped the question to Garnet, Mikoto was in her study, going through appraisal reports for items that had been submitted for auction. The letter basket was stacked with party invitations, and the auctioneer had set up a meeting with a renowned dressmaker and jeweler tomorrow to choose what to stuff her closet with. Mikoto hoped she would get to meet more interesting people than the housewives from Cafe Carta who would not shut up about their sons who wanted to marry. On the coffee table, by the reading couch, was an airship catalogue and a theater district play schedule that Zidane had brought for her. Once she received her own airship, she would also pay a visit to the Black Mage village to properly say goodbye to everyone and see who wanted to come along with her. It was ironic that for a being that had only been given life to destroy this planet, she had come to love it and regard it as her home. She loved Gaia's geography, climate, culture, history, and people, and wanted to discover more about it. She wanted to read more books, dress up, go places, take dance and piano lessons, and throw parties. After being born on a dying world, almost giving up on life, and searching for her raison d'etre in a strange new world, her life had just begun, and she intended to live it to the fullest. The End.